I'm open to wherever the conversation takes us. I'm particularly interested in, especially after watching this last video of yours, the spiritual work that you do. So, my audience and I myself would primarily be like deconstructing Christians,
Mhm.
especially people that have had traumatic church experiences, particularly out of the evangelical tradition of Christianity. Some people are mainline, but the majority of them are offshoots of mainline Protestantism. People from the holiness movement, people from the charismatic movement that would be familiar with different ideas about the spiritual realm, and they might have personal experiences with stuff like that. I think that I have, but I'm pretty skeptical. But the common thread that pulls us all together is the idea that the progressive church spaces in which many of us find ourselves, and I'm just using the universal us and we because frankly I'm not consistent in my church attendance. For me, it's more about relationship and building a foundation of connection with people. And when that's not happening, it's hard to stay interested and involved.
Mhm.
So, universally, the connecting thread is that the progressive spaces that we find ourselves in don't know how to care for people and reintroduce people into a faith community that have had more emotional, more visceral, spiritual type experiences. People that are familiar with speaking tongues, being slain in the spirit, and having a deep personal sense of interaction with the divine. Most of the progressive spaces that are affirming and not toxic, and there's female leadership and diversity and equity, those spaces tend to be more traditional in terms of theology, in terms of their liturgical expression. So there's not really room for that extra weirdness, that may be part of the experience of the majority of the evangelical Christians that are deconstructing and coming out of toxic spaces. So for somebody who wants to maintain that personal sense of intimacy with the divine,
Mhm.
who wants to have a significant relationship, they want to tune into that side of reality. It's hard to find a space and feel like you belong somewhere.
Okay. How can I help?
I think based on your profile and in the things that I'm hearing, I think it would be interested to hear your perspective on healing and where that spiritual aspect comes into healing. There are a couple of questions that I came up with, but I'm open to wherever the conversation takes us.
Okay.
First, for everyone's benefit, let's just start with your story, and you can summarize it or hit the highlights or tell whatever you like. You say that you have an extraordinarily ordinary story, and I'm just curious, what's your exposure to organized religion? Did you grow up in a religious household or did you not? What was your journey through that like? And we don't have to talk about trauma. Obviously, that's a part of my story.
Mhm.
If there's anything you'd like to share that was traumatic that maybe led you to where you were, that's fine. But just walk us through how you got to where you are. What have your experiences been?
Well, my path is very typical of and illustrative of the design that is created for us to experience an incarnation. I had as you referenced, a pretty typical life for the first 50 years of my life. I was raised in a Catholic household, but not particularly overly Catholic. And I toyed with various concepts vacillating, you know, well, I wasn't Catholic enough for a while. And then I realized, no, it's not getting any better. And then, you go back and forth until about my 50th year. And I had what is often referred to as an awakening, which is a very misunderstood concept. And understand that we are an analog projection of a metaphysical self. So we are both simultaneously existing in the metaphysical world, which is our enduring self. It is eternal. It is not terminal by any means. And what you and I currently are experiencing is an analog projection of our metaphysical self. We've had multiple incarnations. The average human has had over 3,000 incarnations, some as many as 8,000. And if you imagine that the nature of our existence is very similar to a sports team, we practice all week. We watch game films. We get coaching, all of that sort of stuff. And then we have a game. And we're supposed to remember in the game all the stuff that we learned in practice and implement that in the game. And we implement some of it and forget a lot of it. And then we go back to the locker room after the game and we go through the process again. And right now we're in the game. We're experiencing that. What we are tasked with doing in the game, as well as in our metaphysical self, but primarily what we're aware of is the game. And we are tasked with having experiences. It's through those experiences that we fulfill our purpose for participating in creation, as well as ideally fulfilling the mission that we had for this particular incarnation. And this understanding, this knowledge came to me after my awakening, which is nothing more than taking the awareness that heretofore before awakening is pointed outside of us because it is required to observe the world around us in order to measure how effectively our erroneous perception of self, our hierophant, our identity, our ego, whatever, it's all the same thing. There's no distinction between it, is doing and getting us more of what we like. And what we like is unique based upon our experiences. When we have an awakening for the first time, we invert that awareness that before then has been pointed outside of us to observe the world's reaction to our identity. And then we modify our identity to make it more effective in getting what we like. But we become aware that regardless of the successes that we may be experiencing from a conventional standpoint, monetarily, family, so forth, we're not happy. And that in order to have that awareness it's necessary to invert that awareness. Once you have that awakening, that's the beginning of healing. Healing is the surrendering or false perceptions of self, of our perceptions of being an autonomous being, and exposing ever more significantly our authentic self and exploring that authentic self to the greatest degree that we are capable.
So, in exposing that authentic self, obviously that takes work. There, some theologians in the spaces that I'm familiar with would say shadow work or ego work, but obviously, whatever we call it, it takes work to dismantle the bubble around us that's been created by the ego.
Mhm.
What is the end goal of exposing that authentic self? Is that a nirvana here on earth? Is that, an enlightenment and dissolution of self into a greater, divine? What does that look like to you?
Well, that's the process of evolution.
Mhm.
Is enlightenment. The enlightenment is a misunderstood concept. It's not a destination. We often perceive it as a destination because of the successes of the Buddha, but it's actually the path, and everyone is on the path, whether they are aware of it or not. It is the evolution of our perception of self, our beingness, which is actually that metaphysical self that I was referring to earlier. What is preserved after an incarnation is very simply what we have learned about the inherent characteristics of the Creator, which are the characteristics that define the entire structure of creation, and creation has very definitive structure. We are
Mhm.
very elementary in our progression. by design. We are all is one. It's
Mhm.
called the law of one. There is nothing that is not the creator. The theologians have toyed with this idea, but they haven't really grasped it.
Mhm.
And the very basis of most religions, Hinduism and I think Sikh aspect of Sikh has done away with the perception of separation in their theological thinking. And what we are doing by participating in evolving is creating a hierophant, a false perception of self, which creates an opportunity for uniqueness. We
Mhm.
uniquely create a lens through which we enjoy our experiences and consequently diversify the creator's experiencing of itself. But that is stress provoking. And stress is anything that we don't like, which means that anything that we experience that challenges the authenticity of our perception of self, which is our hierophant, our false perception of self, doesn't feel good. And so consequently, it is our teacher. Stress is our teacher.
Mhm.
And suffering is nothing more than if you think of stress as hitting yourself in the head with a 2 before 1 and hopefully learning the lesson that that hurts and not to do it anymore. But suffering is when we don't learn that lesson and we perpetually bop ourselves in the head with the same 2 before. And so, healing of stress and suffering is becoming aware of those aspects of our hierophant that we have created by virtue of our experiences, surrendering those, experiencing less stress, experiencing greater happiness as a result, because happiness fills the void that is left by surrendering these erroneous perceptions of self, beliefs that we have instituted into our perception of self. And that is our guide. If we're experiencing greater happiness, then we're following the path accurately and succinctly until we eventually, and this is not in this range of consciousness, we will progress to other ranges of consciousness as we make progress. We will eventually surrender that identity entirely, but we will still explore our authentic self from the perspectives that we have from which we have arrived and continue that ever surrendering the authenticity of ourself into an ever vaster perception of unity until eventually we dissolve that entirely and realize that we are the one infinite creator without division or separation. And this takes place over a range of what are called densities, 8 densities. We're in the third density. The first 2 densities are the first density, very succinctly, is inorganic matter, what we would consider to be inorganic matter, which includes atmosphere, water, and fire. Second density is plants and animals, or plants and animals. They are foundational, and they were foundational because they are necessary in sequence in order to provide the environment for us to have an incarnation in third density. A third density begins essentially at a zero starting point. We're a clean canvas that we can paint anything on that canvas that we like that falls within the parameters of that particular experience. And we do that until we evolve past that range of consciousness by fulfilling the curriculum of that range of consciousness and move on to the next range of consciousness.
Okay. So several questions came to mind, and I might be all over the place. But first, I'm wondering, in terms of duality or dualism, in it, part of my journey has been moving away from Western and Greek thought. And part of the idea of this connectedness, which could also be noted as like quantum entanglement of
Hmm.
all things, but part of moving away from or moving into that understanding of connectedness is moving away from the idea that we are separate, that our, let's say, the metaphysical self that you were describing earlier is not just housed within an organic vessel, but that we are connected to it.
Hmm.
What do you think about that in I guess duality in general? Is there a separation, or what does it look like in your metaphysical?
There's only separation in our perception.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is purely our perception and what we're dissolving and as we progress through the evolutionary process or simply surrendering our erroneous perceptions.
Hmm. Okay. I want to put a pin in that because I think that that is the threshold to a conversation about death and what happens to our physical self, our organic matter as we progress through the stages of this experience. This is all incredibly fascinating too. I grew up Catholic as well, and then my parents decided that they were done being Catholic, and
Hmm.
that's when we joined an evangelical church in the holiness movement. In its early days, in the late 1800s and 1900s, as it came to organize, it was referred to as the Charismatic Church of the Nazarene.
Hmm.
So it's born out of that holiness movement and the mystical movement in the United States, particularly a charismatic movement dealing with spiritual warfare and divine healing and things like that. So that was part of the tradition early on, but they dropped that name to disassociate themselves with the ones that they would consider more weird,
Hmm.
which really does a disservice to both the history and to the reality that you experienced within that tradition because they were still talking about spiritual warfare. They still prayed for divine healing. There was still a very elemental spiritual aspect to my experience within the Church of the Nazarene. And I was a pastor for 15 years in that tradition, and our experiences led us away from that. I would say that I had an awakening and for me, it was primarily triggered by the disparity between what my denomination was claiming to believe in and what we were actually practicing. And so I turned that question in on myself and realized that I couldn't continue to associate myself with an organization that I didn't feel was being authentic.
Hmm.
And I needed to continue to progress in my own journey towards that authenticity that I was expecting to manifest around me.
Right.
So that's my history. But I still use the language. I'm still engaged in theology. That was one of the thoughts that was triggered too by your explanation of what was the word you used? The phases that we evolved through.
Yeah. Third density.
Density.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you were explaining the densities, theological language about being, about matter, that was something that was triggered as well. Let's take a step back. When I was watching your recent video, you had Michelle Henderson on. Viewers can or listeners can look her up, look up that video. I'll put all of your socials in the show notes so that
Okay.
people can follow up and check you out on YouTube and on Facebook and things like that. But
Okay.
in that conversation, what you were talking about in that context was channeling. And you mentioned the feeling when you first experienced that, that you were making things up. And then there was a little bit of conversation about ego. And I'm curious if you used to, or if you currently would consider yourself skeptical.
Not at all.
Okay. So you tend to have a very open posture when it comes to things like aliens or spiritual beings or alternate dimensions or things like that. What does that encompass? Your openness.
Well, all of creation is a series of vibrations.
Mhm,
Higher consciousness, what we consider to be our higher selves, angels,
mhm.
anything like that, or just simply higher consciousness beings. They're higher vibrations.
Okay.
We are, as I said, elementary in our evolutionary progress is when consciousness begins at this range of consciousness, we, for the first time, preserve what we've learned through our experiences into an individualized entity. And our consciousness, our metaphysical self, is a consciousness pattern that is constantly amending. And right now we perceive ourselves to be thinking in these bodies, but the reality it is our metaphysical self has amended with the lens that we've created with this incarnational hierophant that is adjudicating the thoughts that we process. And each thought in and of itself is a complete experience. The fruit of that thought is what you and I are experiencing.
Mhm.
And so we have very limited capabilities to be aware of what is actually going on with us, and that's by design. We can only process one thought at a time, and it's because we can only process one thought at a time. We perceive time to be linear. Time is simultaneous. There is simultaneity. Is it not at all linear? In these incarnations that I was referencing before, you can incarnate anytime. If you're participating in the earth experience, it's all going on simultaneously. So you can incarnate something in the past, you can, what we would perceive to be in the past, or something in the future, if that lifetime would provide you with the opportunities for experience that you need in order to fulfill your curriculum to advance through this range of consciousness. And so when we are processing thoughts, we're processing thoughts in the portion of ourselves that is not in time. And so there is an assessment process, and you may be familiar with chakras. Chakras, we have both a metaphysical set of chakras and we have an incarnational set of chakras, and they interplay with each other in order to create assessment points based upon the qualities or the inherent characteristics of the creator that are represented by the colors of the chakras.
Okay.
So
So
each
would you
thought,
say that the metaphysical chakras, that the connection between the metaphysical chakras and in our, spiritual chakras or individual chakras, that connection point or that touch point is what anchors us to our metaphysical being?
well, we're not separate from our metaphysical being. I think I would rather say it that way.
Right. Right.
The process, when we attract a thought, we do not create thoughts, we attract
Hmm.
thoughts, and that's
Hmm.
the nature of creation. All of creation is a grand thought experiment,
Hmm.
and we can attract any thought that we are prepared to attract. If you're not ready to attract that thought because of the nature of how you perceive yourself, you're not going to attract that thought. The difference between a genius and a really smart person is the genius obviously has been prepared to receive higher consciousness information, but he's also reduced the rigors of his perception of self to
Hmm.
allow these unique, what perceived to be unique thoughts to come in. And so they're already there. He's just attracting them.
So my sense through this conversation so far is that one of the barriers to understanding, to shedding the ego, can sometimes be our language, the language that we use. It seems like there's overlap, but there's also limitations that are built into the words that we choose to use. And I was just thinking of that because you said genius, and I know that certain people tend to think of specific people as geniuses, but I want to touch on that because I'm wondering if the language can be a barrier, then thinking about our definitions of things and how we use certain words would be critical to this process as well, recognizing that genius isn't about like intellectual metrics, so to speak, but it's a more whole definition, a more fullness of experience or something like that that we could point to and say that people are genius. What do you think about that?
Well, someone that brings in information,
Hmm.
brings in thoughts that would be characteristic of the product of a genius's mind. That is possible only because that individual has prepared himself. So if I got the tremendously helpful information on physics, it would be wasted on me because I don't have the academic background
Hmm.
to understand the information that's coming in. But someone who does has prepared themselves with that foundational information and has surrendered the rigors, the stricture of their identity
Okay.
to allow themselves to attract those higher consciousness thoughts is
So
going
there's
to
there's a
bring them
tuning.
in.
So there's like a tuning. We mentioned earlier about like frequencies.
Yes,
It's sort of preparing yourself in such a way that you are able to receive the signals that translate that information in such a way that you can actually do something with it.
right, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
And the from higher consciousness beings, they're constant. We are an experiment, and they're constantly experimenting to see how we can be more productive in fulfilling the purpose of creation. And part of our physical body that we incarnate into has two significant deficiencies that have aided the slowing of our evolution. One is a mouth
Hmm.
that we can communicate verbally. If we did not have that, then we would be compelled to develop our telepathic abilities, which
Hmm.
other planets do. The other is the thumb. And we consider both the mouth and the thumb to be essential to our progression as human beings. But imagine trying to throw a spear if you didn't have a thumb. It'd be
Hmm.
very difficult. And so bellicosity has been a significant part of our history because
Hmm.
of the thumb.
I like that. I like that connection because definitely, if anybody could observe our history and know how much war and aggression and violence has played a part in our development,
Hmm.
then they might begin to understand that as a detriment. I've got a group chat with some friends, and we were talking about the disclosure that the U.S. government was giving yesterday about aliens being among us, having interacted with humans. We've actually captured and studied them, like those kinds of disclosures. And one of my friends mentioned that like, this is one of the most important stories in human history. And I don't understand why every network isn't covering this. And I think part of the reason why is because of the necessary reconciliation of understanding and owning the barriers to our own evolution,
Yeah, I
you
mean
know?
it's extracurricular to anything that the government does. There is a significant plan afoot
Mhm.
to establish a more significant, ongoing, in-person presence with the earthly population, and that's begun. The Pleiadians look most like us, and so they're kind of taking the lead.
Mhm.
But they'll be, and they are already have started. Familiar with Admiral Byrd's, the Navy admiral that explored Antarctica?
I think maybe pieces of it, but let's get
Okay.
into it.
Well, he was the principal Antarctic explorer, and I think it was back in the 30s, and he flew over Antarctica attempting to do some mapping. And he flew over. He wasn't. It was a surprise. He wasn't supposed to discover this, but the Pleiadians have an ongoing significant city base under the ice in Antarctica. And they're still there. And he flew over their base and it was exposed for some reason. And he reported it. And of course, when he reported it, they all said, well, we can't let this out. So we'll just say he's crazy.
Mhm.
And so the rest of his career was somewhat tainted, but I think
Right.
they remained his admiral status. But the Pleiadians, being the first leg of the planned increase in contact in physical ships, are appearing over coastal ways, waterways. They're visible from the shore. They've not made a presence in the United States yet, but it will. And the plan will be that they will begin to hover and actually hover in place so that the population become accustomed to their being there,
Mhm.
and regardless of what military exercises that they employ to try to investigate, that is not going to be successful. I mean, they're so technologically beyond what we have available. It's not anything they're worried about. But that will increase until we actually interact on an ongoing basis. And all this is supposed to transpire, already started, but it will transpire significantly more evident the next 5 years.
Mhm.
And the timing is important. It depends. It will be held up if we start World War III, because they won't get involved with that.
Right.
But there are significant changes taking place in the earthly population that have begun several years ago that are ongoing. The third density experience is a timed experience. And it's roughly begins and ends in approximately 76,000 years. And it's been described to me, it's as regular as a clock. We ended a third density experience in February of 2016, and we began a new one. And we didn't notice anything on Earth, but we've started a new third density experience. After each experience, the population individually is assessed for their fulfillment of the curriculum requirements and ability to do fourth density work. And so there is a graduation per se to from third density to fourth density. But
What is that?
simultaneous, huh?
What does that look like?
Well, it's an assessment of your metaphysical self by significantly higher beings and large quantities of significantly higher beings in sixth and seventh density entities. Because it's you have to, in order to, once you've made the jump into fourth density, your learning is greatly intensifies. And it's like being in third grade. If you don't learn the lessons of third grade, you won't be able to do fourth grade work.
Right. So that assessment, does that I don't know how familiar you are with, different pop culture references, but I'm such a nerd, as you can see behind me. But Star Trek was one of my favorite shows growing up. The Next Generation for me. There's a race in that series called the Q, and
Yeah.
the Enterprise's interaction with the Q is very antagonistic one on one. But in the scenes where Picard has experienced the Q tribunal or the collective community of the Q, it seems much more conversational, investigatory, sort of more inquisitive than.
The Q is represented with a significant personality
Mhm,
and very egotistical
mhm,
relative. The six density entities are our creators. They've created this experience that we're enjoying,
mhm,
and there is no that's the density of unity. It's a very broad density. It's the broadest density. All distortions, conceptual distortions that create the nature of our experience are created in sixth density above, way through that density. All those distortions of perception, motion, unconsciousness, like perceptions of separation, have to be integrated back with the inherent internal characteristics of the creator. So the distortions don't exist.
okay.
But below that, they are archetypes of the creator, just as the inherent characteristics are archetypes of the creator.
So in this framework, is the creator, the ultimate divine, the eighth?
Well, the eighth density is actually the creator is the subject, because what makes creation possible is the one infinite creator had a desire, became
Hmm.
aware, and the desire was that it know itself by experiencing itself. And if you're all that there is, then you have nothing to experience other than yourself. And so that prompted the creator to project an analog, first project an environment called intelligent infinity. And within that environment, projected an analog projection of itself. And the only distinction between the
So
one infinite creator and the projection is the projection had a distortion of perception, which we call free will. But that free will, we misinterpret
okay.
it as not the choice to turn right or to turn left. That's the product of free will. Free will is the perception of separation. And so because the one infinite creator projected this analog that perceived itself separate from the creator and with all the same qualities and capabilities of the creator interacted with this projection, and the projection created a uniqueness of experience that the one infinite creator could observe and learn of itself.
Okay. So I'm going to use my Christian language to
Okay.
try to break this down, because at first what I was thinking of was the theological concept of incarnation.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, that's obviously Jesus, the second person in the Trinity, the embodied or analog version of the
I'm sorry,
metaphysical
I lost
reality.
you.
But then as you continued, I thought, well, maybe this is Adam. Maybe this is the mythical first person, because in my theology, not necessarily in my training, but in my understanding, that idea of separation is sort of the threshold for the negative experiences that we've had from that point forward. The idea that we are separate, that the product of free will perpetuating that sense of isolation, aloneness, ownership, things like that. So that made me think of the creation story in Adam, and in that actual consequential separation from God because of choices that led us away. What do you think about those concepts? And
Well, and
straighten me out if I'm going down the wrong path.
yeah, I wouldn't go down that path yet. Let me explain a little more.
Okay.
that separation, that projected self of the creator, created the creator as the object, which was the originating one infinite creator, and the creator is the subject. So that was the first. And because of their interaction, that subject object relationship, that's how we learn. Consciousness is that one infinite creator as the subject. And so the having the same motivation as the creator is the object, creator is the subject, actually is what developed creation. And in the subsequent declining ranges of consciousness are declining only because each layer of consciousness is created by increasing the degree of perception of separation. And so the free will acts as an intoxicant. If you drink too much whiskey, you do stupid things that you wouldn't do if you weren't intoxicated. And the
Mhm.
same is true with free will. If you're significantly intoxicated with free will, then you wouldn't do the stupid things that you do if you weren't intoxicated with free will. And so in the seventh density, the density just below the eighth density, which is a fractal of the eighth density, five inherent characteristics of the creator became delineated. They certainly were part of the creator, but they were not delineated. And those are sequentially or hierarchically awareness, love, wisdom, unity, and stillness. And all of creation is predicated upon the design to explore those inherent characteristics as significantly as possible. So, seventh density is actually exploring stillness, sixth density is exploring unity, fifth density is exploring wisdom, fourth entity is exploring love, and we are exploring awareness. And part of the curriculum requirement for us to prepare an advancement to fourth entity is to surrender, begin to surrender this hierophant that we've created, become aware, and actually become awareness in preparation for graduation to fourth density, because you have to be aware in order to study love. But love is not an emotion. Love is an inherent characteristic of the creator. Every time that we have felt love, it is not because we've gotten anything. It's not a commodity. We've not gotten anything and we've not given anything, but we felt comfortable enough with the person, place, or thing that we are currently experiencing that we were willing to surrender this perception of self that we call the hierophant long enough to feel our authentic self, which is the love.
Mhm. Okay, give me those inherent characteristics again. So it's
Awareness,
awareness,
love, wisdom, unity, and stillness.
love, wisdom, unity, and stillness. Okay?
And then certainly we are all of those things because we are the one infinite creator experiencing ourselves at this range of consciousness. But our
Mhm.
capacity to explore those higher elements are not reserved, but are most possible with the degree of consciousness that is afforded with the higher ranges of consciousness.
Okay. So in the progressive theological spaces that I find myself now, one of the primary frameworks that I'm intrigued by is process thought, process theology, in particular concept of being and function within the world. In it all, there's a lot of overlap. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate that the things that I'm studying and discussing with other people that there's so much overlap here. It's just that different language that I was talking about earlier, different definitions, different terms.
Right.
But Whitehead's process thought is the foundation of that framework. And sort of the central element or the primary inherent characteristic that is described in that framework is love. I like here that there is sort of more than love, but I'm curious if these inherent characteristics, if those are the characteristics that if we're talking about those as the characteristics that frame not only our reality, our but also are a part of our telos or the reason for our being. The phrase I hesitated there because the phrase that I think is associated primarily again with love is that is the currency of the universe. That's sort of the operating system of the universe. That's how everything exists and functions. So that's the goal. is for us to primarily investigate and experience. And I love what you said about when we surrender ourselves and are able to move beyond the ego and feel that connectedness. That essentially is the love that grounds us in our metaphysical truth. So there's a question in there somewhere. Sorry. I'm thinking in these inherent characteristics, is one primary over the other? Is there, what would you say about currency of the universe, the operating system?
Well, the operating system is I understand that these are hierarchical only from the standpoint you have to build the foundation before you build the walls. You have to build the walls before you build the ceiling and so forth.
Hmm.
And so what we are tasked with becoming at this range of consciousness is awareness, because until you have that awareness and have understood that awareness is not a nice or a catchy word, that is the tool to heal our erroneous perceptions of self.
Hmm.
This range of consciousness requires that we create this hierophant that essentially requires us to experience a lot of what we don't like, a lot of stress. Under the same premise and the understanding of the creator being all that there is, couldn't experience itself. It had no perception of self because it didn't have anything to compare it to. And so our task at this range of consciousness is to experience a lot of stress, a lot of suffering,
Hmm.
until we awaken and stop doing that and begin healing that
Hmm.
perception of self that is perpetuating our experience and suffering. As
Hmm.
we do that, we experience more and more happiness as we expose more of our authentic self. And so, because we learn by comparison and contrast, the process of analogy, we have to begin by experiencing a lot of what we don't like until we realize, I don't like this.
Right.
And then we
Exactly.
begin to experience more of what we like. And that's the measure of how we're doing and how we're progressing along the enlightenment path. If we're getting happier, then we're making good progress. If we're off into the weeds and we're continuing to experience that stress and suffering.
Hmm.
Once we become awareness, that's the foundation to begin to do fourth density work. So we begin the process of fourth density is we will initially become electric bodies. In other
Hmm.
words, we will no longer be chemical bodies. Will be what they describe as It's not really electric, but it's energetic
Right.
bodies.
Energy. Right.
And
Okay.
so we will no longer need to die and be born. And we will continue that experience until we surrender the authenticity of the physical completely. And fifth density, the end of fourth density and fifth density is not physical. Sixth density has no physicality to it whatsoever.
Hmm.
And so we're surrendering the need to incarnate because we are purely exploring ourselves as those inherent characteristics of the Creator, still having experiences and still interacting, but we've
Hmm.
greatly surrendered our perception of autonomy and formed what are called social memory complexes, which is nothing more than numbers of us bind together and we surrender our autonomous self perspective and perceive the social memory complex to be ourself. And that
Hmm.
grows ever bigger as we evolve upwards through the system. One
Okay.
of the strategic things that you had briefly alluded to, and which is inherently foundational to Christianity and many other religions too, is the concept of duality of a devil.
Hmm.
One of the decisions that we have to make at this range of consciousness is whether we are going to surrender this hierophant and evolve closer to the Creator by choosing to be service to others, or we choose to enhance that perception of separation by
Hmm.
enhancing that hierophant, that
Right.
autonomy. And that's
Right.
considered to be the indirect path to the Creator because we will go on potentially for billions of years until we reach a brick wall because you can't be in unity with the Creator and separate at the same time. And so you'll have to go back to square one, start all over, and learn the path to service to others.
Right.
But
And
that's
let's circle back to this, but that segue right there takes me back to my one of my earlier questions about the metaphysical chakras and our spiritual individual chakras, and that anchoring that I was referring to is because in my mind I was thinking of C.S. Lewis, his work The Great Divorce
Mhm,
was instrumental for me in reconceptualizing heaven and hell and being.
mhm,
The way that he described the development of the individual as a coinciding with the separateness from God.
Mhm.
That was incredible for me. And so my thought there was the more we feed that hierophant, the more individual we feel and separate we feel and choose to be, that sort of disconnects us from the metaphysical. And the only reason why it can be sustained is because we have those individual chakras, the individual essence, but it's not connected to source. It's not reintegrated into the whole. And so that was my thinking there. One thing that I wanted to circle back to is we've said it a couple of times, but happiness, well, first of all, suffering. I know that one of the questions that you get a lot is suffering necessary? Why do we suffer? And I think we've covered that to an extent, other than the direct question of whether or not suffering is necessary. It sounds to me like and I've heard this before in my own personal therapy, but also great therapists have said it before that pain is a part of reality, but suffering is optional. In this, the suffering would be like what you described as, hitting yourself with a 2x4 over and over, not learning. It's the fixation that we have on the pain that creates the suffering. So with that in mind, is the suffering necessary? And then the other question was, is there a difference between happiness and joy? And if so, expand on that.
Both are happiness and joy are different words for a condition of being. It's
Mhm.
how we are.
Okay.
That portion above said is exposed, stress-free. Suffering is not necessary. It is our creation, but
Mhm.
it's essentially inevitable because we're not aware yet. Our awareness is pointed outside of us. As long as
Right.
our awareness is pointed outside of us instead of inwardly, then we're going to perpetuate that experience of stress and eventual suffering.
Mhm.
So it's not necessary, but it is a basic problem that
Right.
humanity has created and experiences universally.
Right. It's one of the variables that we have to
Right.
deal with. So our awareness being pointed outside of ourselves rather than internally. What is that awareness pointed at, do you think? What are the things that we are looking for, expecting, what have you,
Outside of us or inside of us?
outside of us?
When it's
And then
when our awareness is pointed outside of us, I've got to watch your reactions to my identity that I created. Because I
mhm, mhm.
created this identity for the sole purpose of tricking you into giving me more of what I like. And so I have to modify my identity constantly as we're interacting in order to try to make it more effective to trick you to give me more of what I like.
This sounds like algorithms on social media right now. This
Yeah,
this
it
is
does. Yeah.
This is the persona. We've created an additional persona in addition to the hierophant that we're experiencing right now.
Hmm.
There's that added layer that just complicates things. So now we've got to peel back that layer before we can get to the real layer that we need to peel back.
Right.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I'm not sure where to go now. I have all these other questions. How do you think we're doing?
Population globally that we are doing pretty good. Our awareness is up, and that's one of the reasons that has allowed the extraterrestrials to begin the process of integrating with us. They used to interact with us much more significantly. We've been in isolation and quarantine really for about 25,000 years
Hmm.
because the service to self folks are perfectly capable of interfering with us, and most of the hegemonies that we deem to be foundational are service to self oriented because
Hmm.
it keeps us in a cycling in the lower realms of consciousness. You had made reference to the biblical reference of the Garden of Eden,
Hmm.
and Eden actually is how the Anunnaki, it's an Anunnaki word for their base that was headquartered in Egypt, where they manipulated the human DNA in order to restrict our evolutionary advancement. And so Eden is, you're saying in Anunnaki word, which is a service to self entity, and
Hmm.
volume is multiple entities that are part of that concept of extraterrestrials on the negative side. One, understand that you and I receive both metaphysical self and physical self, receive a constant flow of what's called intelligent energy. And we require that intelligent energy to maintain our posture in creation. And it's provided to us directly by our higher self. when we choose to go to graduate along the service to self path, we're choosing to alienate ourselves from that source of energy, but we still got to have it. And so we've got to get it from another source. Third density is like a Goldilocks' porridge. We've got enough energy to make it worthwhile their while to interfere with us and steal it from us, but we're not smart enough to know we're not supposed to give it away. And so the third density, not just globally, but throughout creation, are the target of the service to self entities in order to induce them to give it up. They can't steal it. They can't come in and take it from you, but
Mm-hmm.
they can do things to get you to release it. Every time we go to war, we release it. Every time we experience fear, we release it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they create vehicles like war, like it's okay to be, bellicocious with our fellow humans
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
order to fulfill this need for service to self enhancement, our ego. Service to self, we most easily can identify as people that are diagnosed as narcissistic, psychopaths, sociopaths. They're just choosing service to self path. That's all they're doing because they have to maintain a domination and subjugation of others in order to extract this energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's all they're doing, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. That's what they're doing. And of course, the higher consciousness beings are encouraging that. They're creating the beliefs and the hegemonies that perpetuate us in these cycles of destruction and fear. And that's why we were quarantined, because they were so interfering. But they used to interact with us a lot, and when they were required to leave, they left us little gifts like the Easter Island statues and lines of Nazca, Stonehenge, countless others around the world, because those things scared the people of that time significantly. And so it perpetuated fear in their recollection and their tribal stories and so forth of the interactions of the service to self, the star people,
Mm-hmm.
to maintain that fear, even though they couldn't interact with them as they used to.
So, a couple directions we could go with that. It sounds like those artifacts, you're saying that those were a product of the service to self entities. Those weren't constructs in collaboration with us. So,
No, no,
okay. Okay.
no. They knew they were having to leave, and so they wanted to leave us a parting gift.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that has been a consistent theme here, I mean, obviously, it's one of the inherent characteristics that we talked about, but awareness is our discovery tool and healing tool, you've said before. How are we healed? What does that healing look like? And are we talking about a combination of like psychological, emotional, physical well-being, or are these concepts that are still grounded in our 3D-ness that we need to move beyond in terms of real healing?
Well, understand we are a mind, body, spirit.
Mhm.
Our mind is a misunderstood concept. Our mind is nothing more than the bundle of beliefs that we've created with this hierophant. Our hierophant is nothing more than a bundle of beliefs, but it's our perception of self. And so the more askew that it is, the more non-reality it is, then the more stress it perpetuates for us. The body, the condition of the body is the manifestation of the mind. So the mind tells the body how to be, including our brain. And so when we have an emotional or a mental dysfunction, as well as physical dysfunction, is because the mind has told the body to be in that certain way. So healing is essentially a two-step process. One is healing the emotional baggage that we have collected, which is nothing more than the life lessons that have been brought to us that we didn't learn at the time. We get to keep that in the form of emotion, and that is stored within us according to the chakras.
Mhm.
The other is becoming aware of the beliefs that we've incorporated into this identity that perpetuate our experience of stress, because that's the magnet that attracts the types of thoughts that we experience. And so as we become aware of the beliefs that we've incorporated into this hierophant and we surrender those, and I explain it to people, it's very much like you walk out your front door one morning and you're going to work and you look down and your car's got a flat tire. Your awareness has discovered the problem. Well, you're not going to walk away from the car and never use the car again because you've discovered the problem. You're going to get the tire fixed. Whether you
Right.
do it yourself, you'll call somebody, or whatever, you get the tire fixed. The same is true when you discover the belief that you've incorporated into your identity that is perpetuating your stress and suffering.
Mhm.
I'm not going to keep it. I'm going to let it go. And it
Right.
is a matter of simply letting it go.
And this is the phenomenon that's popularly referred to within, especially like Christian circles, as deconstruction.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
deconstruction, or you can call it mindfulness. It's
right,
mindfulness.
right.
Same
So
thing.
one of the things that one of the reasons why I created this podcast was to explore, that deconstruction. But really, the goal is to help people and to help myself to find what the next step is, because you can't deconstruct forever. You have to reconstruct. And I know that it's a cyclical process because you will discover other issues, other detriments and barriers that you will then have to address also. So we're constantly deconstructing and reconstructing. But the question is, what's next? What does this lead to? What is the evolution of either Christianity or spirituality in terms of our human experience? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like what sort of a deliberate collective consciousness looks like spiritually? Is there a particular community? Is there an orientation to life and creation that will be one of the characteristics of this next level?
Well, we're glad you asked that. Simultaneous with the beginning of a new third density experience, we also began a fourth density experience in parallel, in conjunction with the third density experience. 47% of the children that have been born worldwide since roughly 2005, some before then, but almost all since then, are actually fourth density children. And as they reach the age of maturity and begin assuming responsibility, then they will higher consciousness essentially is not going to put up with the BS that we perpetuate with our third density limited perspectives. And so the plan is that the fourth density children will for 2, maybe 3 generations interact with the third density, and then the populations will simply divide, and the higher vibrating fourth density will operate independently and completely separate from third density, but third density, hopefully having experienced the close interaction with the fourth density higher consciousness, will begin to operate on a much higher level than we have heretofore been able to accomplish.
Mhm,
And that's the plan. And so you can see these force density children on YouTube all the time. The
mhm.
what we would consider to be prodigies, not only in music and the arts, but also in philosophies and just vast understandings of how the creation works.
Yeah. Well, I think like social justice as well.
Yeah,
People like I
absolutely.
don't know when Greta was born, but like Greta Thunberg, their awareness of our connectedness
Yeah,
driving their action to actually respond to crises, global and local. This is an example of that, I
yeah.
think.
But significant changes are in the offing.
I believe that. I think that there is. I work in IT though. I've worked in IT for 15 years and I've got concerns about AI like anybody in this industry does. I've got concerns about social media. How do you think let's say, well, I wanted to say distraction, but now I want to characterize them as those self service mechanisms to draw our energy out of us and to keep us sort of paralyzed in this position. What is the danger with those? How do we overcome the weaponization of technological tools? And then is there a way to reclaim and repurpose those?
Well, the way it's been described to me is that over the next 5 years, we will see technological advances equivalent to the last 150 years.
Hmm.
So, we're just on the cusp of seeing technological changes. Again, it's how you use it.
Hmm.
And what they're counting on is the interaction of the higher consciousness extraterrestrials on an ongoing basis, as well as the input and direction from the fourth density children. So, these are fourth and fifth density entities that are going to be interacting with it that are not children. They're not
Mhm.
beginning fourth density. They're long, well developed spirits. And so um, they don't require physicality, but
Mhm.
it's all certainly possible. And they're here now. I mean, the Arcturians have been in orbit in a higher vibrational craft for centuries, if
Mhm.
not longer.
Mhm.
So it's not a new experience. As I was alluding with Admiral Byrd's discovery, the Pleiadians have had a physical base here on the planet.
Mhm.
And there are many other entities as well. And understand these are all just like us. They're a range of consciousness. Well, I didn't get into this. We are actually part of a 9-star system galaxy is
Mhm.
comprised of 9 archetypes of the creator, and it has been expanded in groups of 9 stars. Each star is home to a sixth entity, an archetype of the creator. Our particular sun, what we call the sun, is home to law, which is um, wisdom, archetype of the creator. And so Ra is love, and actually homed in Sirius B. And Earth the population is a creation of a combination of Ra and law, love and
Mm.
wisdom.
Wisdom. Yeah.
And so they are our guiding archetypes.
Just for fun, I think I know the answer to this, but I loved when I was listening to some of your stuff, and I love the name of your podcast, the Arcturians. Though there's a reference in pop culture.
Hmm.
There again, the aliens universe, the Arcturians are referred to just in passing, but the literature expands on the original lore and they play more prominent roles. My question is, what are the connections within literature, specifically science fiction, movies or literature or music that deal with those themes of science fiction? What is the connection to what people might call mythologies or stories or whatever? What's the connection there to reality? And is that a deliberate thing or is that like an inadvertent thing you think that, that
Little of
different
each,
writers or
little of each.
creators?
The Arcturians are simply a sister 9-star system.
Mhm.
The Pleiadians are a sister 9-star system. And so as the galaxy has expanded, those closer to the center of the galaxy are older.
Mhm.
They've been in the process a lot longer, so they have a lot more experience with developing creation. We are on the periphery, and so we're relatively new. So they've long been involved with counseling and advising us in our evolutionary endeavors.
Mhm.
The Ra was actually, there was a time when Ra actually walked among the people in Egypt.
Mhm.
Ra built the pyramids. People went to sleep one night. They woke up the next morning and the pyramids just boom were there. And they
Mhm.
were after the demise of Atlantis. Atlantis was a real continent that sunk
Mhm.
beneath the waves. And so there was a significant loss of population at that time. But the service to self, the Edun that we were referring to, was actually in Egypt. That was the world headquarters for the service to self. And the population was extremely bifurcated at that time
Mhm.
and constantly warring. The Osiris is the aspect of Ra that walked among the people. And so that was real,
Mhm.
but by their own admission, they were somewhat naive because the folks that were aided still chose service to self, which is their option. And they became the priests that dominated and subjugated the population all over again. And so Ra left.
Hmm. Interesting. So, I mean, we in the 21st century are dealing with the legacy
Yeah.
of that
Yeah. But Ra is
framework.
very much active. I mean, that's my higher self. That's who I talk to every day.
I'm going to ask you. So, at some point in our earthly history, our planet served as like a intergalactic hub where different species were interacting with us, interacting with each other, setting up sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Embassies and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. We are the game to watch because we've
Hmm.
had such difficulty in our evolutionary process. But hopefully we've crossed the threshold that we can move forward and not have to retreat again.
Right. And that that connects to a thought that I had earlier when you were mentioning that generations. It's been difficult for the past. I think you said 25,000. Okay,
Yeah.
so ancient Greeks talked about, I'm trying to remember the name of the writer who went before a tribunal because he was accused of collaborating with the spirits in such a way that it caused harm to his neighbors. They were
Mhm.
scared of the interactions that he was having with higher beings. But there's an entire Greek ideology and stories of interactions with higher beings in the philosophy of the correct posture to take
Mhm.
with higher beings. And one of the postures or the admonition is to be cautious, that not to be scared, because these are realities and these are beings that are interested in us for different reasons. But it does mention that there are some beings, which, in the framework of this conversation, I say would be the service for self
Mhm.
beings, to be cautious of, because they can be tricky.
Oh, yeah.
But in general, there was this widespread acceptance of, yeah, there are other dimensional beings, there are higher beings that we interact
They
with,
used to
and
interact
that's
with
just
the
a normal
Sumerians
part of
all the
life.
time.
Yeah. So what happened?
Quarantine. Well, all that we have record of is post Atlantis
Hmm.
suffering, other than what's left in Egypt. And what happened is the quarantine
Hmm.
and lower the consciousness of the population. Because in order, and understand that the folks that channel the Arcturians and channel the Pleiadians and the higher consciousness beings, what is actually happening there is those are analog projections called wanderers from those entities, from those aspects. And so they're already attuned to that vibrational range. But even though you're getting, say, for example, six density information from the Arcturians, they are actually channeling through a fifth density entity of their species, their
Hmm.
entity. So you got to get the vibrational mix, close together.
So there's an intermediary.
Yeah, because there's a huge vibrational difference there.
Gotcha. So there have to be individuals who are
Attuned to that.
who build a bridge, who
Yeah,
are
right.
the bridges between, that have the capability to operate on both frequencies
Right.
and even simultaneously.
Yeah. Was explaining the plan for the fourth density children, and how that plan is to escalate the consciousness of the third density population.
Mhm.
Before then, we've had introduction of what are called wanderers, which are analog projections of higher consciousness beings, for the most part sixth density beings that have projected an analog projection. But they have to live a third density life. In other words, there's no special privileges. They have to awaken, they have to, do the self-healing in order to do that. The Buddha was that. Jesus was actually a fourth density, but Jesus was a very unique, because fourth density, understand, as we were just talking about, has just recently surrendered the authenticity of the physical.
Mhm. So he was ahead of the curve.
Well, yeah, but Jesus was an analog projection of his fourth density metaphysical self, and that his task was to do as he did. Jesus now is a fifth density, part of fifth density social memory complex, as is Sarah, Mary Magdalene, all of the group that was around supporting Jesus, and they're part of Latwii. And Latwii is a social memory complex. It is actually part of Law, our sun sourced archetype. And the idea was that the wanderers, by virtue of the possibility their high vibrational beingness, would emanate that and raise the consciousness of the population. In the early 80s, I know that there was roughly 37 million wanderers incarnate. We're down to roughly 5 to 6 million range. They've been leaving the population. So the transition is going from a wanderer-based influence to the fourth density-based children.
If this is non sequitur or not, but I'm curious where ghosts fit into all of this
Goes to
framework.
just there is a transition point. When we die, it's as simple as taking off, you're changing clothes.
Mhm.
Literally, you no longer have any of the worries of, you did just a minute before when you were alive.
Mhm.
But someone who has an extreme attachment to a place or people, things of that nature that they can't resolve when they leave their physical incarnation, and they're unwilling to progress along the transition to merge with their metaphysical self, and they're stuck in limbo. But of course, they're out of time. And
Mhm.
so they don't know whether they've been there for a day or 30,000 years.
Mhm.
And there's help available if they ask, but they have to ask. But the transition, and you can do this in meditation. I don't
Mhm.
recommend it, but I did this to a degree with a guide from my higher self. You go through a series of lights, and each light is a transition point where you're surrendering the authenticity of being in the body.
Mhm.
And depending on your degree of consciousness advancement, your metaphysical self, you may have 3 or 4 lights that you go through. You may have 15 lights. If you're very elementary, very young, and a neophyte and doing the process
Mhm.
that you have to go through in order to make that transition. But you merge with your metaphysical self. You go back into the locker room and you go through the game films and the coaching and all that stuff in preparation for the next game.
Mhm. So, 2 questions, and thank you for your time. I don't wanna keep you, but I appreciate your energy and your
Sure.
time and willingness to have this conversation with. Is that what you're describing? Is that what some people would refer to as their astral body or astral self? And then, the other question I was thinking of our earlier conversation about reincarnation and the
hmm
cycle of learning. When do we break that cycle and no longer need the reincarnation? That's the transition into.
It's near the end of fourth density.
Okay,
But,
okay. So
but
that's.
we've broken that cycle of perpetually reincarnating as one constant. When our body becomes all electric, there's no
Mhm.
reason to keep dying.
Right. Okay, okay. I thought we had covered that earlier. So the transition that you experienced, was that what people would call astral body or astral
Well,
plane
yeah,
or.
and your body, your astral body can stand up and look at your physical body and then
Mhm.
get back in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
When someone experiences a near death experience and they begin that process, they reach a point and they're greeted and said, "Okay, it wasn't your time, but if you want to go, you can go. If you don't want to go, then we'll send you back."
Right. And
And
is that,
so
I mean, one of the common experiences of NDEs is a light.
yeah,
Is that one of those
it's just
levels of
that
light?
light is information. That's all
Mhm.
light is, and it instructs energy and how to be. And so you're reintegrating with your metaphysical self, and we perceive it as light because we're gaining the information that we had about our being our metaphysical self, and we're surrendering the attachment to the authenticity of the physical.
So you mentioned for about 50 years, you just had a normal kind of mundane experience of
Unconscious
life.
life.
Okay. But then your awakening happened, and this information that you're sharing with us today is information that you've been teaching. Was there an overlap between that unconscious life and some of the things that you were exploring and teaching and sort of grasping or wrestling with versus where you are now?
Well, yeah, I began my collegiate academic career with a keen interest in science, and that quickly transitioned into philosophy. And so
Hmm.
the philosophical inquiries that I had in the studies that I ended up focusing on were a precursor,
Okay. Okay.
and
So
essentially that was teaching
again,
me
that
how
was
to
the
think
that was the
critically.
priming that sort of was like the tuning fork experience that allowed you to receive the information that you're now working with.
Right, right.
Okay.
As philosophy teaches to think critically,
Hmm.
and regardless of what information, it's the critical thinking that is the essential behavior that emerges from philosophical studies.
Hmm. So what is one thing, this kind of goes back to the earlier part of our conversation, but as you're discussing with people these concepts, or as people are experiencing this reality for themselves, whether they're interacting with higher beings or just receiving the light or the information that they need,
hmm
how does consent play into that? We talked about surrender, like there is a conscious decision that needs to be made and acknowledged, correct? To
Yeah,
to like
you have to
participate in
ask
this
the
process?
question. You have to ask the question. If you ask them the question, then they know you're ready for the answer. If you
Mhm.
can't form the question, then they're not going to sit you down and say, "This is what you need to know." So you are the motivator for how far you want to go.
Okay. And what does going back to your story, when you talked about being Catholic, not getting any better, I went through similar phases myself where I tried to be the best Catholic that I could be.
Mhm.
I felt early on, like from the age of 10, I felt a very deep sense of longing and ownership over a spiritual identity within myself, cultivating that and helping other people to do so. I interpreted that as the time as a calling into ministry.
Mhm.
Then, as we transition away from the Catholic Church into a different Christian experience, I continue to interpret that as a calling into ministry to be a spiritual leader. But while I was Catholic, that manifested itself in like hyper spirituality, the reading of the scriptures and the teachings of the church, the singing of the hymns, participation in my parish in different ways. In your experience, was there an intensity that sort of manifested itself that way? And if so, what were you looking for that helped you to realize that wasn't going to cut it, that that wasn't enough for you?
Well, the rituals and Catholic churches are very good with rituals,
Mhm,
and, you know, the camaraderie that is
mhm,
offered is very helpful from the standpoint of providing that sense of community and acceptance and so forth. But that becomes inadequate if you don't have the information and the understanding, or it did for me, and I observed that in others as well, because we have that innate draw to
mhm,
return to the creator, which is nothing more than the surrendering of our perception of separation and allowing ourselves to have that authentic self to emerge, which is the one infinite creator. So
mhm,
the more that we can heal from our erroneous perceptions of self, surrender that perception of separation and be who we already are, the more sense of unity that we have, the more complete
mhm,
we feel.
mhm. So, one of the concerns that I have and that anybody listening to this would be having is especially in church culture,
Hmm.
community is such a huge aspect of what is lost when you go through this awakening or deconstruction.
That's the fear.
Being cut off from the people that you thought you knew, that you thought you could trust. I mean, sometimes that's on the other side. You know, they cut you off.
If I may interrupt you, I think
Yeah.
I have understand that when we create this identity,
Mhm.
that becomes our perception of self. That's a platform we create in order to support that identity. Friends, that's why we choose the friends that we do, family members that we associate with, groups that we join, including churches,
Mhm.
and our spouse and possessions that we have.
Mhm.
All of those, we choose those because we perceive that those will support the identity that we've created and hold it in stability. One of the things that is so significant to us when we lose a significant peer support, for example, when a spouse dies,
Mhm.
we enter into that condition of grief that we call grief. And that is actually comprised of two things. First of all, we fear the instability of our identity because the identity is who we think we are.
Mhm.
And we fear that instability because this was a significant peer support that held our identity in place. The
Mhm.
other thing is we fear the loss of the love that that person we perceived was providing us. We weren't
Mhm.
getting love from them. We were getting permission to be who we were.
Mhm.
And so there's significant fear when we lose a community. You lose the groups that you felt comfortable with before. You lose many of the friends that you had. All of that negative feeling, that stress that we feel is intended to be our teacher to realize that we are not dependent upon that.
Mhm.
That allows us the opportunity to be more of our authentic self and realize more of our unity with the creator. And we observe, and that's one thing that's so significant about people that have experience in NDE is they have that opportunity for a perspective that you don't have as um, as a non-DE experiencer.
Mhm.
And so life stresses become significantly less stressful,
Right. Right.
less
It
demanding on you.
People say it puts things into perspective, proper perspective. You're
Yeah,
you're no longer worried about the things that you once were concerned with.
right, exactly.
Okay. So, and that hits exactly where I was going. I was curious, what does it look like for someone who is experiencing awakening to be in relationship with other people? And I think you answered it, but you can elaborate if you want. But the idea of recognizing that certain relationships prop up an identity that is false anyway,
Right.
allows you to be able to hold certain things loosely, including relationships, and recognizing that if there are people in your life who are interested in evolving as well, that even though that journey is theirs to take and it's separate from the work that you can do,
Mhm.
you can be on that journey together and you can experience a relationship that isn't constraining.
Right. Right. I understand that we are truly magnetic. And
Hmm.
as we change, as we raise our vibration, then those that no longer resonate with us fall away. And
Right.
new ones that do resonate with us at a higher range of consciousness are
Hmm.
immediately attracted to us. And
Right.
so that platform evolves.
Right, exactly. I love that. I think that's as good a place as any to end our conversation because the the framework that these conversations usually take ends in that question of what's next. What does it look like to move with this knowledge into the next iteration of who I should be or what I should be doing, what kind of community I'm helping to build or to be a part of. And that's such a beautiful answer to that question, I think.
Yeah. Well, understand that we learn by observing others and we observe those that we deem to be happier than we are. And we will continue to mimic that person that we deem to be happier than we are until one of two things happens. One, we realize they're not happier than we are, so we discard them as a model,
Mhm,
or we become their level of consciousness. And once we do that, then we again search for another person or opportunity to observe greater happiness. We emulate that until we achieve that, and we stair step up the process that way.
mhm,
But we attract what we need at the moment.
mhm. That's excellent. So, is there any closing thought or a word you'd wanna share? And then if not,
Beginning
shamelessly
the
promote
process is
yourself.
scary for most people. It was intimidating to me, but I was foolish enough not to not to think about that too much.
Mhm,
But it's our destiny. It's what we will do it now, or you will do it later.
mhm,
You might as well go ahead and do it now. And once you undertake the process and you begin to experience greater happiness and greater joy, and you just want to heal more.
mhm, mhm. And so this whole conversation, I'm thinking of a friend of mine who studies neurobiology.
Hmm.
And there are science backed, study based neurobiological realities that we're talking about here. When you're talking about the kind of person that you're becoming and operating at a higher frequency, your heart radiates that
Yeah,
and affects the atmosphere around you. So not only
absolutely.
are you attracting the people and the things that you need, but you are literally changing the environment around you to
And you're
be
repelling
more
those that feel
right.
irritated by it. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is a journey that can be self-sustaining and insular and help you to continue with that momentum into the places where you need to be.
Yeah. And,
So,
and understand that the experiences that you will have are immutable. In other words,
mhm,
as you achieve a certain degree of advancement along the enlightenment path, you will experience the equivalent joy of everyone else at that range of consciousness.
so what are some steps that listeners can take to either begin or continue this journey? Tell me about meditation practices and some of the best
Well,
advice that you can give
there's
about
only
that.
one meditation practice. There are multiple ways to transition between the village mindset into the meditation trend, and whichever works for you is best. But a meditation is nothing more than the inwardly direction ever deeper of that awareness. That's all meditation is. And the more you do that, the faster you heal and the deeper that you go. To
Mhm,
begin the process, dealing with that emotional baggage is something that is intimidating for most people. And I teach and I recommend the 12-step program. You can take alcohol out of it, you can take God out of it, but the steps themselves require that inwardly directed awareness and
mhm,
beginning to heal the emotional baggage. And if you do that, either by yourself or with assistance, and introduce a meditation practice, you will experience remarkable success in a short period of time.
Okay, excellent. And you're shamelessly promote yourself. You're a spiritual director, yes, or spiritual coach.
I help people and wherever I can. I'm a mental health counselor. I work
Hmm.
primarily with traumas because those are usually the first things you need to clear in order to make significant process progress.
Hmm.
I have 4 books that I've written that
Hmm.
provide this information and much more. I have 2 podcasts now that I conduct, chatting with the Arcturians, and one that I'm just starting in Infinitely One, which focuses more on the law of one. So, I have all my contact information and resources are through a website, the initial ddeangraves.org. And, I'll help folks. I do public speaking, whatever I can do in order to aid the healing of humanity.
Hmm. Excellent, excellent. And I'll include those links in the show notes and as best a summary as I can of our conversation here.
Super.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I appreciate your spirit and thank you very much
Thank
for spending
thank
a
you. It's
few
been
hours with me.
my pleasure, Joe, and I'm delighted with your inquiry and the work that you're doing as well.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thank you. I hope I can continue to help some people clear things and move in the direction they need to move as well.
Super.
So that's what I'm trying to
Okay. All right. Well, charge on.
do much. I'll follow up with you and let you know once this is published. There might be a few clips if you want to promote anything on social media, but
Okay.
I'll let you know. And I'd love to have you back too. So
And
I
and
think,
just let me know when.
all right. Sounds
All
good.
right. Thank you,
Thank you very
Joe.
much. Yep. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.